Recording.
Can I have your attention, please? Vote. Great, thank you. So welcome to this special town meeting. I just want to set out a few parameters of how we are going to comport ourselves. Now, we're all set up here with microphones and there's a microphone there. I just need to tell you that we're not legally bound to record everything. We're recording for the benefit of people who can't be here. So what I'm going to tell you is going to give you a little bit more freedom. If you have a question during the proceedings that we go through the warrant, all you need to do is preferably stand up, state your name and address, and ask the question. You don't have to come to the microphone to ask the question. That way a lot of knees will not be knocked. Our moderator will repeat the question and direct that question to the appropriate party. If you feel like there's more need for discussion, the moderator, who is in charge of the meeting, will ask you to step forward. All communication at a town meeting goes through the duly elected moderator. All conversations need to go through the duly elected moderator. There will be no side conversations among people within the town meeting. Please ask the moderator to be recognized. Please state your name and address, at least the first time, so that we are taking minutes. And we should be fine. I'm going to quote one of the most esteemed members of the town, Mr. Thomas Hall, who will tell you the definition of democracy is not pretty, but it's the only form of government that we have and that works. This is a special opportunity. You are here to determine the direction of the town. With that, incumbent upon that, you have to recognize that everybody here has a different perspective. It is our obligation to treat each other with respect, with civility, and then we'll come to a determination. So I just want to repeat, all, I'm going to call it correspondence, must go through the moderator, and the moderator will recognize you if you are allowed to speak or not. If you do not live in town, you need to be authorized by the moderator and a vote from the people who do live in the town. Are there any questions at all before we open up this special town meeting? Perfect. Becky Chase.
Thank you, John. So Article 1 is to choose a moderator to preside at said meeting. I will open the floor for nominations.
I move that we nominate Alan Chesney.
I'll second that.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, I will close the floor to nominations. We need one ballot cast. Pascal, can you retrieve the ballot, please? Absolutely. Come right over to the microphone.
We have one ballot cast for Alan Chesney.
Alan Chesney has been elected the moderator. You will now take the moderator's oath.
I, Alan Chesney, do swear that I support the Constitution of the United States and of the state, so long as I shall continue a citizen thereof. So help me God. I, Alan Chesney, do swear that I faithfully discharge to the best of my abilities the duties incumbent upon me as moderator and panel according to the Constitution and the laws of the state. So help me God. January 22nd, 2024.
The meeting is yours, Mr. Moderator.
It was a close vote, I know. And it is an honor to be your moderator this evening. I want to welcome everyone. And John kind of stole my thunder a little bit on some of the housekeeping rules, but I'm just going to run through them again. For those of you who come to the meetings on a regular basis, you've heard these before, but if there's no objection, I'm going to be guided by the main moderator's manual in running the meeting. All registered voters who have checked in are permitted to vote. Visitors or non-registered residents are required to remain over by the bench on the side of the room over here. Thank you. And may speak only with the consent of at least 2/3 of the voters present. The person may not speak before being recognized by the moderator. And once recognized, speakers are asked to stand, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. And the first time someone's speaking, please state your name and address so everyone knows who you are. I may ask that you come forward up to the microphone to further the discussion if that's necessary. Please address all remarks to me, moderator, and remember to be respectful of others' points of view, even if you happen to disagree. And I'll attempt to make sure that everyone who wishes to speak is allowed to, but do reserve the right to terminate discussion when all relevant viewpoints have been heard. Article 2 relates to adoption and or an amendment to an ordinance, and by law, it is an up or down vote. Discussion is allowed, but any proposed amendments to the article as written will be deemed out of order. Okay, so we're going to move on to Article 2. Article 2 is shall an ordinance entitled 2024 amendments to the panel zoning ordinance be enacted. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the ordinance entitled 2024 amendments to the Pownell zoning ordinance, which is in paper form here tonight with the top red line draft titled Pownell Land Use Ordinance Conservation Subdivision Draft November 2023 be enacted.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I'm sorry, and your name is?
Excuse me, Donna Watson, Poland Range Road.
Thank you. Donna's seconded. We'll open the floor to discussion. Does anyone?
Mr. Moderator, may I just make a brief presentation on exactly what the ordinance does?
You may. Could you identify yourself?
My name is Matt Altieri. I live on Hallowell Road. I'm the chair of the planning board, which is the town board that's been working on this for over a year now. We've spent over a dozen meetings and workshops working through the conservation ordinance. It really came about after we reviewed the 2020 comprehensive plan. So a couple of items from the comprehensive plan jump out to anybody who reads it. One is that everybody in town agrees that we want to preserve this town's rural character. What rural character means is not entirely clear, and it's in the eye of the beholder. It means to some people hunting and fishing, and to other people being able to hike on open land. It means lots of things to lots of different people. What it certainly doesn't mean, I think all of us would agree, is subdivisions. Whether you're in favor of subdivisions or opposed to subdivisions, subdivisions are not typically what you think of when you think of rural character. The planning board doesn't take a position on whether subdivisions are good or bad. That's not our job. Our job, though, was to try to do our best to amend the subdivision ordinance so that where we're required by state law to have subdivisions in town, those subdivisions that would be allowed would be consistent with what most town residents would agree is rural character. How do we do that? We did that by trying to require applicants for subdivisions to preserve a certain portion of their land in open space in perpetuity. So I'm going to get into a couple of the specifics of what this ordinance does and what it doesn't do. It requires all major subdivisions, so subdivisions that would divide a single parcel of land into 5 or more lots, to preserve 60% of the space as open space in perpetuity. It also requires that the developments on that parcel that are built be at least 200 feet back from any existing road. Okay, so that the view shed is protected. So if you always saw a hayfield in a spot, you'll continue to see a hayfield there. It allows the planning board to require that buffering be created where there would be a big impact on the view shed. Obviously, every piece of land is different. And so there are certain areas where the planning board needs to have discretion to work with the landowner, the developer, to make sure that what we're doing works for the town and works for the view. There are some sort of aesthetic pieces. We don't want to have the planning board having complete discretion to do whatever it wants. But by the same token, we want to have the planning board be able to recognize pieces of land are different, and we want to have a different, we want to have the ability to be flexible with different pieces of land. Because the developments are pushed back 200 feet from the road, we also allow applicants to build their road where it used to be 600 feet. It's allowed now to be built up to 1,000 feet, and there may be discretion to grant that even farther. So that again, the goal is to push development back away from existing roads. One piece that's important to note, and that I think, that's important to note, is that applicants are allowed, when they choose to do this, to decrease the lot size from where it normally would be 2 acres per development. It now is allowed to be ½ an acre per development if they choose. Now, I want to point out, this is counterintuitive. Most of us would think, okay, large lot sizes are consistent with what we think of as rural character. In fact, the way we looked at it and the way we had guidance from a lot of experts in land use explained to us what that does when you have 2 acres as a minimum lot size is it creates a number of big front and back yards, but it doesn't allow you to preserve contiguous open space, which is the goal of this ordinance amendment. So if you want to have open space, you need to be able to push developments into one smaller area. And that's the goal of this amendment. Okay. Just a couple of other items. Again, what does this apply to? It applies to lots of 5 or more as a mandatory matter. For lots of 4 or 3, so a subdivision is 3 or more lots, so 3 or 4, our minor subdivision ordinance, which we've always had in place, remains in place. However, applicants are allowed, if they choose, to use the conservation subdivision at their discretion, so they can choose to abide by those standards instead. I want to make one final point that's really important. The way this ordinance works is that an applicant comes to us and they say, I want to build 6 lots. The first form that they need to fill out and the first plan they need to submit to us has nothing to do with the conservation subdivision. They have to show us using the existing frontage and dimensional requirements that they would be able to build just as many lots under a normal standard as they are under this. So this doesn't expand the number of lots at all that an applicant can build. It keeps it baseline. So the whole goal of a conservation subdivision ordinance is to be density neutral, and that's what we've accomplished here. The way we've done that is we've said, you've got to meet the frontage and density requirements applicable in the district, and you need to submit a plan to us that shows that you can do that. So you have 300 feet of frontage on the existing roads, or if you were to build a road, you would have 300 feet of frontage on that road. And by the way, that road needs to be on a buildable piece of space, so it can't be just like a made up road through something that could never be built through, right? So the goal there is to make sure that developers aren't able to say, all right, we're moving down to these postage stamp size lots, so now we can build as many houses as we want. No, the goal is to say, you're able to build exactly the same number of lots. You're able to push that into a smaller area so that we preserve more open space, but you're not going to build more and more lots. All right, with that, thank you, Mr. Moderator, and open the floor.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Do we have any questions regarding the article? I have a question out here. Sir?
Tom Hall, 176 Merrill Road. Matt, can you give a little bit of background and history as to why the planning board is proposing this ordinance?
Absolutely. So one thing I overlooked was to introduce other members of the planning board who are here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Hall. That jogged my memory. So also with me here tonight are Brian Stornelli, Marcia Bowen, Orion Breen, Todd Mellon, Mercedes Poor, and Bill Schmidt, all of whom put a great deal of work into this ordinance. Literally, when you think of man and woman hours, well into the hundreds of hours were spent, as well as extraordinary help from Sam Pikes and from Ben Smith at North Star Planning. And we had assistance throughout, obviously, from town staff, from the select board, and input from other boards and commissions in town. This was what I made the mistake early on of calling this a relatively simple proposal. And I made that mistake a couple more times before other board members told me to stop saying that. There's nothing simple at all about it. So we had seen a big influx in proposals for subdivisions in the time frame from about 2019 to 2021. What I would say, we were drinking from a fire hose. We were seeing applications at every meeting, and we just couldn't keep up. We responded to that in a number of different ways. One, we asked for help. We sought out the support of North Star Planning to help us in the process of handling actual applications and making sure that all the Ts were crossed and Is were dotted. We also looked to the select board and we said, we want the board to actually think about whether this is the time for a moratorium on development of subdivisions in town. Because of the lack of actual building permits that had been issued on the basis of these subdivisions, it wasn't the time to do that. We didn't really have a legal basis to look into that. But we wanted to make sure if the pace of applications was going to continue, we wanted to make sure that the planning board had more ability with more discretion to require applicants to do things like require buffering, to require that open space be preserved. And then the 2020 comprehensive plan came out. And what was very clear from that, when you read it, there's sort of disputes about whether we should really be focusing on affordable housing, whether there should be senior living in town, whether the town center should be developed. There's a lot of things that there's not a lot of agreement on. But the thing that there is a ton of agreement on is the preservation of open space and the preservation of rural character. As it stands, our subdivision ordinances don't do either of those things. What they allow for is a bunch of big 2-acre lots that are right up on existing roads and that change the way the Pownell landscape looks. And so we wanted to work with the town. We sought input from lots of other committees, lots of other boards. We tried to publish this as much as possible and worked through this process. The hardest thing for us was figuring out a way to do this without allowing developers to build more lots than would have been allowed under our existing ordinances. We found a pretty simple and straightforward answer to that when we worked with our town's attorney, which was to say, you've got to actually submit a plan that shows what you could do under existing ordinances. And that's pretty simple. So that was our outcome. So thank you.
Other questions? One in the back.
You talk about public spaces, that's not, that wouldn't be public access.
Thank you for the question.
If you could just, questions directed through me. Okay.
Moderator.
And the question, I'm not sure I heard a question. It seemed to be more of a,
Definition of what you mean by public.
okay, the question is, what is the definition of open space? Does it imply public access or not? Is that correct? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
You
Mr.
may.
Otter. So we initially had the thought that we should require that these open spaces be public access for all. We had some conversations with the town attorney and some input from other boards and members of the public who said, well, there's actually, you're sort of stepping on the landowner's rights if you do that. So the way that we've enacted it now is that the developer and the homeowners association will have the option, but not the obligation to allow these to be open access to the public. They are limited in what they can do, obviously, on that open space. They can't develop it, but they have certain passive recreational uses is the way it's called, and there's a definition of that in the ordinance. So basically hiking, skiing, snowmobiling, that sort of thing.
Other questions or comments? Yes, sir. The question was, the open space, that is, contemplated in perpetuity. Does that mean that it cannot be further developed or, restricted, going forward? Is that correct? Okay. Matt, would you care to address that?
Please. So there are three options essentially in the ordinance for how a developer would handle this. One option is to grant an easement. Most likely this easement would go to the Royal River Conservation Trust. A second, I guess there are four really. A second would be to grant the whole lot, the whole open space entirely, the ownership of that to the Royal River Conservation Trust or some other easement holder, so that they would hold it. So those two, the way a land easement works is that it's held in perpetuity. The third option is that the homeowners association owns it, but they have to submit to us the homeowners agreement that shows that it's going to be preserved in perpetuity. That goes through legal counsel at the town. They approve it, and they have the opportunity to say, no, this doesn't, meet all the criteria. And the fourth option, if the town wants it, and the town, might have very good reason not to, they can cede the property. They can give the property to the town. So those are the four options.
Other questions?
Dave Steckwell, what would be the tax implications of open space with the people who own the property, just through an HOA? Is that going to be a shared tax?
The question relates to possibly a homeowner association, and what are the tax implications of the ordinance? And is there a shared obligation by the people subject to that subdivision or not? Or is it an individual obligation? Is that right? Thank you, David.
So the short answer is it depends on who owns the actual open space. So if it's held by the homeowners by the homeowners association, then it would be a shared obligation. If it's owned by the developer, then he or she would have that obligation. We worked with the town's assessor to see how this works in other towns. We said, because there was some concern about how this would work out, and whether it would reduce the tax base. And her response essentially was, this is very normal. It doesn't change our assessing approach at all, and won't really affect the value of the property. I can't get into the details beyond that. Frankly, it's a little bit over my head, but we looked into it with the assessor, and she had all the confidence that it would work out fine.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
Susan Peters. To follow up with that question, this land is in the Royal River, that means no tax will be
Okay, I think the question, if I got it correctly, Susan, was if the Royal River or some other easement holder holds a conservation easement on that property, does that affect the taxability of that property? Is that correct?
Yes, basically what we always collect taxes on that property.
Okay. Matt, would you care to?
Sure. So as I understand it, there's effectively 3 state programs that allow for some sort of reduced taxes if you hold land in easement, right? One's the tree growth, one's the open space, and there's a third that others may know. I'm not entirely sure. But effectively, they say, if you're going to preserve this as undevelopable, right, then we're going to respect that and not assess it as though it were developable space. So we'll assess it at a lower value. The goal of that state statute is to say we want to sort of incentivize people to conserve open space. So developers, homeowners associations, they would have the option of using that, just like they would, whether or not this ordinance was enacted, they would have the option of using those if they, if they preserve these in open space. So those would be available to, they might apply to these parcels. They have the process for going through that. They just apply to the town's assessor. They show that they meet the state statutory criteria. I think the select board members who are here might tell me I'm wrong. I believe that then goes to the select board for one final checking, and then they receive their okay from the assessor.
Other questions, follow-up questions, Susan?
So I understand what you're saying, I'm just, so if, for example, it's given an easement of Royal River, are we always going to be at least collecting some taxes? And, all of them that go.
The question, clarification was if Royal River or some other conservation organization holds an easement, will it ever be taken out of the tax base completely? Is that correct?
I don't believe so. I don't, the way that the easements normally work is you might have the opportunity to get some sort of reduction in your property tax, but they don't get taken out of the tax base entirely by any means.
Okay, other questions? Oh, excuse me. Yes, can you identify yourself?
I'm thinking now, if you had a hypothetical 10-acre parcel, which if you applied 2-acre zoning under the current ordinance, you could put 5 lots on it, so each have the main taxable item is the building itself. So under this proposal, as I understand it, the houses would be more concentrated and you would be preserving the maximum amount of property around those houses, but you're still gonna get 5 houses on it. So the town is still getting the revenue from 5 new buildings, which is the bulk of the tax assessment, as I understand it. Is that not correct?
Matt?
Uh,
I'm just moderating. Don't answer the questions.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, yes, the building is obviously the most expensive piece of the assessment. So yes, it's not a big significant change when you enter tree growth or open space or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Mr. Hall.
Mr. Moderator, as you said, I'm still Tom Hall. They put a lot of time into it. I wonder if the question could be posed to the planning board. What are their fears, concerns, expectations if this ordinance is not adopted?
If it is not adopted,
If we turn this down, yes.
okay? The question is, what are the implications to the town if this ordinance is not adopted? Would someone from the planning board care to address that? Sir.
Brian Green, Elmwood Road, on the planning board. I think the implications of not adopting it, there's multiple implications. One is, people were not a fan of the current subdivision ordinance, which is why we want to review it, see if we can improve it. There was a number of people who were concerned about specific development and that it would alter the character of Pownell. So we hope that we could address some of those concerns. If we don't pass this ordinance, those concerns will not be addressed. The other piece that Matt mentioned is the comprehensive plan. Everybody, 95% people in the town said they want to preserve more open space. And so this attempt to preserve more open space, preserve rural character. So I think this was unanimous from the people in the planning board. Not everybody on the planning board is of one mind. We had a lot of back and forth discussion. But we all agreed that this change may not be perfect, but it's an improvement to what we have now. It's unanimous opinion. And so we submit it to you to decide if you think it's an improvement. The planning board unanimous in thinking it is, but it's up to you, the townspeople, decide if you think it is.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Moderator, if I may, just
We're
one more item.
Almost there. Okay.
Almost there. I think, I appreciate the question very much. I think, you know, it's a little bit like the frog in the boiling water, right? We all just so appreciate what Pownell is. We appreciate it for different reasons because we all come from different backgrounds and have different perspectives. But what Pownell certainly is, it's a rural place with a lot of land to walk and hunt and fish and a lot of beautiful parcels. I think what we saw in 2020 and 2021 with the pace of applications before the board was extraordinary. And the water was sort of getting hotter and hotter and it was going to start to boil. And thankfully, you know, whatever the last couple of years have brought, it's been painful for a lot of us, but the interest rates went way up and suddenly our applications started going way down to almost zero. But interest rates aren't going to stay that high forever. The developers are going to come back and we're going to see more and more pressure. There's a lot of folks who hold a lot of property in Pownell and they're not gonna sort of hold on to that property forever. So there's gonna be development. We can't resist development. We don't have the option to under state statutes, but we can develop wisely. And that's what our goal is here. So thank you all for your time here.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I'm sorry, I do see a hand in the back.
Why done the special meeting status instead of being sent to a vote?
Okay, so the question is, why is this being handled at a special town meeting versus at the annual town meeting? Is that correct?
Yeah, or for an entire town vote.
Okay, just to clarify, this is the entire town vote. It's a publicly advertised special town meeting, but town meetings are how the town is run. It was duly advertised. There were duly handled postings and public hearings with respect to the work that was done. Just to clarify, it is open to the town vote. Any voters, registered voters that are here and signed in are eligible to vote. Anyone else?
I can try to answer that if you don't mind.
Sure.
So this was on we were moving forward to this past year's town meeting with this item. We decided somewhat close to the last minute that we wanted to make sure that we had everything in order and we're really prepared and we had the thorough legal review to look over this, and they did so. We made some changes after that between sort of August and December of 2023. They weren't significant substantive changes, but they, I think, made this a little bit better. And with ordinances like this, you want to get as perfect as you can. You know, it's never going to be perfect, but you want to get as perfect as you can. And I'm glad we took the extra few months to do it. But we wanted to make sure that we also crossed the goal line. And so we just asked for a special town meeting to be able to do so. For what it's worth, there's probably more people here tonight than there were in the June meeting. So it's a pretty good crowd, which I really appreciate.
Okay, any other comments or questions before we bring it to a vote? Seeing none, we'll bring Article 2 to a vote. It's been moved that the town adopt ordinance entitled 2024 amendments to the Pownell zoning ordinance as presented in the 2 pages labeled Pownell use ordinance conservation subdivision draft 2023, and then the section 400 definitions single page. All those in favor, I'm going to ask people to raise their hands rather than a voice vote, given the acoustics and challenges of voice votes. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Okay, you can put them down. All those in opposed, please raise your hands. I have it that the ordinance was approved by the vote. Does anyone dispute that conclusion? Okay, ordinance passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
On to Article number 3. See if the town will transfer and appropriate up to $16,000 from the unassigned fund balances for the brown tail moth mitigation program grant. The monies refunded from the state program will be returned to the unassigned fund balance. Do I have a motion?
Richard Ho, 167 Loring Lane. I move that we appropriate up to $1,000.
That we transfer and appropriate up to 16,000? Is that how I heard you read that?
16,000.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. It's been seconded by Mr. Hall. Discussion for Article 3. I don't see any questions, so we'll move it to a vote. All those in favor of Article 3 as, oh, I'm sorry. Sir, can you identify yourself?
My name is John Morris. I'm the chairperson of the select board. This is a great opportunity for me to promote this grant. An opportunity for any private landowner to ask for assistance from the town. We will award the state grant to help mitigate brown tail moth infestation. Pownell is earmarked as one of the highest densities of brown tail moth in the state. So we'll, with the help of the 5th grade class at Pownell Elementary School, we're going to be rolling out a information. So glad to have the opportunity just to, if that system exists, then the more information on the brilliant town website.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on Article 3? Seeing none, we'll bring it to a vote. All those in favor of Article 3, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Article passes. Article 4, to see if the town will appropriate up to $21,000 for the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, AKA American Rescue Plan or ARPA funds, received by the town from the federal government for the following project: replacement of the town office, CEO, Public Works and Fire Department's computers. Do I have a motion?
Move that we appropriate $21,000.
Was that appropriate up to $21,000?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Yes, sir. Could,
I have a question about the fund and what are the federal guidelines for spending money out of the fund?
okay. The question relates to the fund and what are the guidelines related to expenditures by the town out of that fund? Is that correct? Okay. Do we have someone that could answer that? Okay. Becky here is willing to answer that question. However, she's not a resident of the town. So I need a 2/3 vote by those voters in the town to allow her to speak. So all those in favor of letting Becky explain it, raise your hand. Opposed? Okay, you're on.
And Becky will do her best. So the federal government guidelines are, well, thousands of pages, but upgrades in the town office computers does fall as an acceptable use of the funds given by the federal government. Other towns in the state have used the funds to do the same thing. They've used it to upgrade their HVAC systems, their printers, anything that helps them run more efficiently.
Any other questions? We have a follow-up question.
So what can it be spent on? I mean, can we spend it on roads? Can we spend it on buildings, infrastructure? Is there?
Well, again, I need about 10 hours probably to go over every guideline and look at each one of those projects. They want it more specific to internal, not necessarily roads, because there's local road assistance programs and things like that that can help. There's also avenues where under rev loss, which we fall under, it gives us a broader scope to use the funds under. I'm trying to stick more to the exact channels that they allow us to use it for, which town office computers is one of those.
So is it safe to say that they put guardrails on what we can spend the money on, but not necessarily roads? Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it to a vote. See if the town will appropriate up to $21,000 from the Coronavirus Local Recovery Fund, or ARPA, for the replacement of town office, CEO, Public Works and Fire Department's computers. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. All those opposed? Okay, the article passes. Article 5, to see if the town will return $44,491.00 from the unassigned fund balance to the fire truck fund balance account G1-4908-00. The select board does recommend approval. And do I have a motion?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town returns $4,491 from the unassigned fund balance to the fire truck fund balance account of G one TAC 4908 TAC not.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Would someone care to explain the need for this transfer? It might help the voters
Sure.
vote for it.
It was just a simple clerical error back in the 2021 budget process where accounts that had not been used were being cleaned up and put into revenues. And it was a sightline, just looking at the computer, reading the wrong line, reading the wrong amount. So the funds were supposed to stay in the fire truck fund and they got accidentally moved. When going over accounts this year with our fire chief, we discovered that. So we asked the select board to correct this accounting error.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All those in favor of Article 5, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Article 5 passes. Article 6, to see if the town will appropriate up to $20,000 from the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, AKA American Rescue Plan, or ARPA funds received by the town from the federal government for the following project: replacement of the town office furnace. Do I have a motion?
That we, raise, move that we appropriate $2,000.
Okay, I've heard a motion that we appropriate up to $20,000 for the replacement of the town office. Those funds coming from the ARPA funds. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion or comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, I will bring Article 6 to a vote. All those in favor of Article 6, raise your right hand. Thank you. Any opposed? Article 6 passes. Okay, Article 7. Put my fingers to work. To see if the town will vote to adopt the Route 9 Omnibus Municipal Development and Tax Increment Financing, or TIF, District and Development Program pursuant to Chapter 206 of Title 30-A of the Maine Revised Statutes as amended as follows. And the article itself, I'm not going to read the whole thing because we would be here all night. But it is printed there for you and has been available and subject to public hearings. Do I have a motion?
Moderator, I move that the town vote to adopt the Route 9 Omnibus Municipal Development and Tax Increment Financing District and Development Program pursuant to Chapter 206 of Title 30-A of the Maine Revised Statutes as amended as follows.
Do I have a second? First, motion has been made and seconded. Discussion, questions, comments? Seeing no questions, we'll bring Article 7 to vote, to a vote. All those in favor of Article 7 as written, please raise your right hand. Opposed? Article 7 passes. And I believe. Oh. That's it. I will, there are no more articles for for the special town meeting. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moderator, I move that we adjourn.
I have a second somewhere. Okay, moved and seconded. I'm sorry, your name, please? Sue? You're the seconder. Thank you very much. All those in favor of adjourning, raise your right hand. Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thanks very much, folks. Really appreciate the turnout.
Yeah. Look on your chart.
Second.